It was late at night, and I was heading to my room after finishing the dishes when my mother-in-law stopped me. Shumela, stay in my room tonight, she said, her voice laced with a subtle tremor. I'm not feeling well. I often have to get up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. Just yesterday I fell. Luckily, there was a sofa nearby to break my fall. If I had hit the floor, it could have been disastrous. You know how long it takes for someone my age to recover from such injuries? Her words dragged on endlessly, as they always did. I felt a flicker of annoyance deep inside, but I brushed it aside. I thought to myself, what difference does it make if I sleep in my room or here? For me, the presence or absence of my husband was the same. That thought alone was enough to draw a heavy sigh from me. Resigned, I agreed to stay with her that night. The next morning, as I stepped out of my mother-in-law's room, I found my sister-in-law preparing breakfast. In our household, I handled the nighttime chores, while she took care of the morning tasks. The housemaid arrived during the day to assist with cleaning, and we managed the rest of the housework together. When my sister-in-law noticed me emerging from my mother-in-law's room, her face lit up with curiosity. Did you spend the entire night in Amia's room? She asked, astonished. I gave her a cursory reply, brushing it off, but she persisted. That's so surprising. How could Shafiq Bahai let you stay away from him for the entire night? He's always so attached to you. My husband Adil wouldn't even let me out of his sight for a moment. Her words stung. I swallowed the lump in my throat, let out another silent sigh, and walked back to my room. What could I possibly say to her? Instead, I busied myself pressing my husband's clothes for the office. Later that evening, during dinner, my mother-in-law turned to my sister-in-law. Will you stay with me in my room tonight? She asked. A silent exchange passed between my sister-in-law and her husband, Adil. Their glances spoke volumes. He was signaling her with his eyes, urging her to refuse. I noticed it all, and it stirred a deep sadness within me. My gaze instinctively turned to my husband, who was completely absorbed in his meal, oblivious to everything around him. He hadn't the faintest concern about what was happening. Even if my mother-in-law had asked me to stay with her instead, he wouldn't have reacted. That night, as I washed the dishes, my sister-in-law approached me hesitantly. She twisted her fingers nervously and finally spoke up. Bobby, I need to ask you something. I already had an inkling of what she wanted, but I kept myself busy and replied casually. What is it? She hesitated for a moment before blurting out, could you stay in Amma's room in my place tonight? You know, Shafiq Bhai never minds such things, but Adil, he'll get upset with me. Her request was fair, and I couldn't deny it. I glanced at her face, flushed with emotions. Her eyes held a dreamy glaze, her cheeks glowing like a kaleidoscope of colors. I nodded, giving her the reassurance she needed. All right, I'll stay tonight, I said. When I entered my mother-in-law's room, she looked surprised to see me again but refrained from asking any questions. Perhaps she too was well aware of the nature of her two sons. I often wondered why my mother-in-law had never questioned me about certain things. 3 months had passed since my marriage. Both my sister-in-law and I had been married around the same time. But fate had been kind to her. She was already expecting a child. As for me, there wasn't even a distant sign of such news. And how could there be? The very thought darkened my mood. Yet my mother-in-law never brought it up. Not once did she ask, why isn't there any good news yet? Even now, as I stood in her room, she seemed completely content with my presence. It's good you came, she said, her tone relieved. Nagina is so careless. She sleeps so deeply that even if I call her, my voice doesn't reach her. But you always wake up the moment I call. I didn't respond. Instead, I silently lay down in my place, suppressing the turmoil within me. That night, around midnight, my mother-in-law's health took a turn for the worse. I hurried to the kitchen to fetch her some water and was startled to find my sister-in-law there, brewing tea at such an odd hour. Her presence surprised me. When I asked why she was awake, she seemed flustered and stumbled over her words. But I was in too much of a rush to dwell on it. I returned to my mother-in-law's room, letting the moment slip from my mind. As days passed, her condition worsened, and I found myself spending nearly every night in her room. My sister-in-law was unwilling, adamantly so, to stay with her at night. My husband, as usual, had no objections. In fact, he seemed almost grateful for the arrangement. Watching his indifference gnawed at me, and I couldn't help but question why he had even married me. If he wasn't capable of fulfilling the needs of a marriage, why did he ruin my life, I thought bitterly. His brother couldn't bear to be apart from his wife for even a moment, while my husband seemed utterly disinterested in me, or in any woman for that matter. He could have simply refused to marry, and I would have been spared this misery. But what was the point of these thoughts now? I endured it all, swallowing the bitterness of my reality day after day. But eventually, I resolved to confront him. I couldn't keep living like this without answers. That evening, when he returned from the office, I gathered my courage and spoke to him directly. My bluntness seemed to catch him off guard. He stared at me, astonished, as though he had never expected such frankness from me. "I'm seeing a herbalist for treatment," he finally admitted, avoiding my gaze. "I'll recover soon. You won't have any complaints then." His words were evasive, lacking conviction. It was clear even he didn't believe what he was saying. Disappointed, I left him there and returned to my mother-in-law's room. What good was it to stay with him when his promises rang so hollow? Later that night, her health deteriorated again. I went to the kitchen to get her some water, and as I passed by my brother-in-law and sister-in-law's room, I heard strange noises coming from inside. I froze, bewildered. What was going on? This wasn't the first time I'd heard such sounds coming from their room at night. But tonight, as I stood there, I felt a wave of shame and discomfort wash over me. They were so absorbed in their passions that they seemed utterly unaware or uncaring that there were others in the house. After giving my mother-in-law her medicine, I stepped out of her room and found myself standing outside my brother-in-law and sister-in-law's door again. The noises continued, louder and more unrestrained. I stayed there, torn between disbelief and humiliation, unable to fathom their lack of restraint. It was becoming increasingly difficult for me to control my emotions. As I peeked through the keyhole of their door and saw them in that state, I felt my self-control slipping away. Overwhelmed, I returned to my room, where my husband lay asleep on the bed. Without thinking, I went to him and clung to him tightly. Startled, he woke up, his face filled with confusion. "What's wrong? Are you okay? What's gotten into you all of a sudden?" But my mind was clouded with only one thought. The flames of the emotions ignited by what I had witnessed earlier consumed me. I demanded, "Give me my rights as your wife. Otherwise, I'll scream and gather everyone in the house. I'll tell them everything about you." At first, he stared at me in disbelief, his expression frozen. But then anger surged through him, and he snapped at me, his voice thunderous. "You shameless, indecent woman! Do you even realize what you're saying to your husband? Respectable women wouldn't dare utter such things. They'd rather drown in shame than express such desires so brazenly. And here you are, making demands as if it's your right." His harsh words fueled my own anger, and I lashed out. "Why did you even marry me then? It's been months, and you've done nothing to fulfill your duties as a husband. I'll tell your mother everything. I'll ask her why she forced you into this marriage when you clearly weren't ready." My words seemed to shake him. He folded his hands in front of me, his voice trembling. "Please, don't tell anyone. My reputation is in your hands. You don't understand how much damage this would cause me. If my mother hears this, it will break her heart, and I can't bear to hurt her. I promise you, I'm seeking treatment. I'll get better soon, and I'll address all your concerns." His teary eyes and soft tone melted some of my anger. I sighed deeply, leaving the room to return to my mother-in-law's side. Yet a storm continued to rage within me. Every few nights I would hear those same noises from my brother-in-law and sister-in-law's room. On more than one occasion, I found my sister-in-law in the kitchen at odd hours. It puzzled me. What was going on? And more than anything, I wondered about my brother-in-law. What was he doing to keep his wife so satisfied and happy? They seemed to share an life. "You've destroyed my happiness." When I see other married women so content and fulfilled in their lives, it leaves a gaping void inside me. I can't control these feelings anymore. Don't you understand that I'm a living, breathing woman with emotions and desires? But you don't care. You never have. But he didn't respond. He sat there, his head hung low, saying nothing as if my words had fallen on deaf ears. Frustrated, I stormed out of the room. That's when I froze in my tracks. My sister-in-law was standing outside, her face pale and her eyes wide with shock. She had heard everything. I was about to change my path and walk away when my sister-in-law stopped me. "Bobby, why haven't you told anyone about this? You've been enduring all this in silence for so long. You should have spoken up. There's always a solution to every problem. But you chose to suffer quietly like ignorant women." Her words made me lower my head in silence. Shame had kept me from sharing my pain with anyone, and I didn't even know if a solution was possible. Then she said, "I have a solution for your problem. If only you'd told me earlier, I could have helped you. But it's not too late." She took me to the kitchen and instructed me, step by step, to follow her lead. I watched her in a daze, unsure of what she was doing. Deep down, I couldn't believe my husband could ever become normal with me. That thought alone made me watch her efforts with disinterest. She eventually handed me a cup of black tea, darker than anything I'd ever seen. "Give this to your husband," she said with absolute confidence. "All your complaints will disappear." Her conviction left me speechless. I stared at her in astonishment, but decided to trust her. Later, when I gave the tea to my husband, what happened next left me in utter disbelief. That night, he was with me not once, but 4 times. The next morning felt like a dream. Everything around me seemed brighter and more beautiful. The day seemed unusually perfect, as though my entire world had transformed overnight. I felt alive again, seeing the world from a fresh perspective. As I headed toward the kitchen, my brother-in-law stopped me in the hallway. His intense gaze unnerved me. "If you had any complaints about my brother," he said, "you should have told me. I would have solved all your problems for you. All that suffering and longing you endured, it could have ended long ago." His words stunned me. I stared at him, unable to comprehend why he would say such a thing. Before I could respond, my husband appeared, and I quickly slipped away to the kitchen. The rest of the day, my brother-in-law's words and the way he looked at me kept echoing in my mind. I couldn't understand why he had spoken to me like that. Then a chilling thought crossed my mind. Had my sister-in-law told him everything? It seemed likely. That would explain why he dared to say such things to me. But what gave him the audacity to speak to me in this manner? I was his brother's wife, his brother's honor. How could he even think of crossing that line? Anger boiled within me. Later in casual conversation, I subtly brought up the topic with my sister-in-law. Her reaction confirmed my suspicions. She had told him everything, but I didn't confront her about it. I didn't want to disrupt the peace of the household. Besides, it was possible I had misunderstood his words or taken them out of context. I wasn't someone who dwelled on petty issues, so I decided to let it go. That, I realized later, was my biggest mistake. That night, when my mother-in-law asked me to stay with her, I refused for the first time. I had finally understood how to reclaim my rights from my husband, and now I was sure he wouldn't let me stay out of the room under any circumstances. When I declined, my mother-in-law looked at me with surprise. "Just stay for 2 or 3 hours, she said. "I rarely even go to the bathroom at night." Her reasoning was valid, but I stood firm in my decision. I was no longer the person who would silently sacrifice her own needs for others. I reluctantly agreed to stay with my mother-in-law for a few hours, planning to return to my room once she fell asleep. When she finally drifted off, I quietly left her room. But as I stepped into the hallway, I almost collided with someone. Startled, I looked up, and there stood my brother-in-law. His gaze unsettled me. It was intense, filled with something dark and unsettling. He scanned me from head to toe, his expression laced with inappropriate intent. "Tell me," he said in a low, deliberate tone, "what complaint do you have against my brother? For now, consider me your husband. I'll fix everything for you." His words drained the color from my face. What was happening to me? How could I escape someone like him when we lived under the same roof? And yet I couldn't tell anyone about this, not even my husband, despite all my grievances with him. I loved him deeply and could never imagine betraying him. Just then, I noticed my sister-in-law's face appear behind him. Her presence was a relief. She stood there staring at her husband with a mix of suspicion and disapproval. Caught off guard, he stammered, "Bobby had said she wouldn't stay with Amma tonight, so I was just heading to check on her." I ran into her on the way. My sister-in-law's eyes lingered on me with an expression I couldn't decipher. I left them both there and returned to my room, where my husband was waiting for me. I brought him the same herbal tea my sister-in-law had introduced me to, and that night unfolded in blissful harmony once again. I felt immense gratitude toward her for sharing that remedy. It had restored my marriage. Apparently, she used the same tea for her husband, too. But now, my brother-in-law's behavior was becoming a significant concern. He was relentless in his attempts to provoke me, constantly suggesting that I indulge in a secret relationship with him. He assured me no one would find out, but his audacity made my blood boil. I couldn't confide in anyone about this either. Time and again, I felt furious at my sister-in-law for disclosing my private matters to her husband. If she hadn't, he would never have dared to approach me this way. He seemed convinced I was a desperate woman, starved for love, ready to fall into his arms like ripe fruit. But he didn't understand. Not every woman is for sale, nor does every woman lose her morals so easily. When his advances became unbearable, I finally confronted him. "If you don't stop this," I said firmly, "I'll tell everyone about you." But my words had no effect. He shrugged them off, unaffected by the warning. That day, my sister-in-law was away at her mother's house. She had gone for a few days, leaving me alone with my thoughts and, unfortunately, with him. My husband had told me in the morning that he'd return home early that afternoon, so I prepared his favorite meal and dressed up in the clothes he liked. I lay on the bed, waiting for him, but somewhere along the way I dozed off. I was awakened by a strange sensation, warm breaths near my face. The feeling was so intimate that I smiled instinctively, thinking my husband had returned and was letting me know he was there. But then a different scent filled my senses. It wasn't my husband's familiar scent. This was foreign, unsettling, and that's when the chilling realization hit me. I immediately opened my eyes, startled, and froze. My brother-in-law was hovering close to me, his eyes filled with a disturbing, predatory desire. Panic surged through me as I saw him so close. "What are you doing here? Get away from me right now!" I shouted, my voice trembling. But he seemed deaf to my protests, intoxicated by his intentions. He began forcing himself on me, ignoring my cries and resistance. I was crying, screaming for him to stay away, but nothing seemed to penetrate his haze. And then suddenly someone grabbed him and yanked him back with force. I looked up, shaken, and there stood my husband. Fury radiated from him as he stared at his brother. Without hesitation, he began slapping him repeatedly. My brother-in-law tried to shield himself but couldn't escape my husband's wrath. Then in a "That's not true! He's lying! I would never even think of doing such a thing." My husband turned to me, his face a mixture of anger and resolve. He didn't believe a word of his brother's lies. "My wife isn't like that," he said firmly. "She didn't take a single wrong step even when I couldn't fulfill her rights. And now that everything is fine between us, why would she do such a thing?" He didn't stop there. My husband took swift action, disowning his brother. He gave him his share of the property and threw him out of the house. My mother-in-law was heartbroken and confused. She asked repeatedly, "Why have you two brothers fought? Why don't you even want to see his face anymore?" But my husband remained silent. He never revealed the truth to her. Even my sister-in-law was unaware of what had happened. I chose not to tell her. Why ruin her perception of her husband? She believed he loved her deeply, that he wouldn't even glance at another woman. If she continued to live in that belief, her life would remain easier and happier. I didn't want to be the one to shatter her illusions,